Good evening, everyone. It's my privilege to call this meeting to order. Welcome to probably the last meeting in this room in the month of May. So glad to have you here. You may have noticed that we have a slightly different arrangement today. That's because we'll be hearing from one of our two special guests who will be telling us what they know about some of the questions that this ad hoc committee has raised. So we're going to invite our guest up here in a moment in our special seating arrangement here. So we thought we'd make it a little bit more comfortable, rather than the Spanish Inquisition up at the podium for 45 minutes. So with that, since the meeting has now been called to order, the next item of business is for there to be a roll call of the members of the committee. Can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Tully.
Here.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit.
Here.
Trustee Kuntia.
Here.
Trustee Williams.
Here. Thank you very much. Everyone is present and accounted for. That brings us to item 3, which is approval of minutes from the April 21st, 2025 meeting. Are there any corrections or changes or edits? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve as presented?
I will make a motion to approve as presented.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Say nay. No one's opposed. All right, so just like that, we're here to the highlight of tonight's meeting. We are very, very pleased and very, very grateful to have a special guest here who I'm going to invite up while I sort of set the table here. John Traska is with us, and we're really grateful for you taking the time to come and see us. We really appreciate it. Your reputation precedes you, so we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts on some of the topics that have been raised. As you know, the members of the ad hoc committee had an opportunity to provide some questions in advance, not so much as to those are the questions, but more of a courtesy heads up as to the types of questions that my colleagues and I will be asking, and then I'm sure we'll have some other questions as we go through it. So with that, unless there's any preliminary comments that anyone wants to make, I thought we could just go to a brief self-introduction, because while we know you by reputation, everyone who might be listening to this at some point in time may not know you as well, so if you would be so kind as to give us a sort of who are you, why are you here, and why should we be in the edges of our seats listening to you?
Oh, very good. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm John Kraska. I'm the Executive Director for Every Library and the Every Library Institute. Every Library is set up as a 501c4 organization, which is technically a political action committee for libraries. In that capacity, we work on local library funding measures and local library governance measures, whether it's bonds to build new buildings, or levies, or warrant articles, or referendum, or parcel taxes. We provide technical assistance to the library boards or the municipalities that are putting those measures before the voters. We also provide assistance to either vote yes committees, which we separate from the technical assistance that we do to the boards and to the municipalities. But technical assistance to the vote yes committees, up until recently, it's been mostly vote yes committees. It's got to be vote no committees around the country as well. Things have gotten a little bit odd with library election days. The work that we do as a political action committee is all pro bono and for free. We're a donor-supported organization. The reason that we do it pro bono and for free is 2 reasons. One is that we should not be using public money to advance the outcome of a campaign. We want to take that off the table, so we don't get paid for it. Our donors come from small donors, kind of the Bernie Sanders model, as well as corporate donors in the library space and other benefactors. We also are stayed pro bono and for free in order to make sure that when we're offering advice and technical assistance, it's not with the idea that we're going to get paid if you do what we say. We're here to provide insights based on best practices. Since we were founded at the end of 2012, we've done 147 election days for libraries. We've taken all the way to the ballot. We have an 85% win rate, and we help communities, large and small, red states, blue states, complicated campaigns quite often. Our C3 side, which is called the Every Library Institute, is public policy, tax policy, and education policy research, the kind of work that's necessary to do to understand not just voter sentiment, but what's the structure of government, what's the structure of the tax code, prosaic things like should we be using revenue from recreational cannabis to fund public libraries. Those kinds of research questions, those kinds of big public policy questions. That work is done as a C3 nonprofit, but not a membership group. So not having members allows us to listen to and help amplify the local legitimate stakeholders. To that end, it's really a pleasure to be here with the board members, the commissioners, and I appreciate Julie for bringing me in as a technical advisor on this conversation. We spend a lot of time helping communities think through the form of their government and the form that allows them to function as a library for the benefit of their citizenry. So it's my pleasure to be here tonight and to entertain your concerns and your questions. I'll bring my best information from around the country. So.
Terrific. Well, once again, thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it, and you sold us on the price. That was great.
Sure. Excellent.
We like pro bono. Pro bono was great.
Yeah.
I was going to spend a moment or two introducing the members of the ad hoc committee are, which is probably still, it sounds like you already know who we are and our makeup.
Familiar.
So we have 2 members of the Downsboro Village Council, and we have 2 members of the Downsboro Public Library Board of Trustees, and that makes up the composition of the joint ad hoc committee. And I'm guessing you may have also probably taken a peek at our charter, which is what we're supposed to do, so I can dispense with that as well. But before we get started, any questions you have about sort of what our mission is? Sounds like you've done all your homework, not surprisingly. We can get right to it because I know we have a number of questions that we had floated ahead of time, but we also have additional questions. I want to give you an opportunity.
I'm not blowing smoke at y'all. The dossier is very extensive, very thorough, and I feel well up there.
All right, very good. Well, we try to be efficient and keep these meetings shorter than library board meetings and village council meetings. So with that, I will defer to my colleagues and see who wants to start with questions. There's no need to go in any order. We all know what we want to ask.
I think we should go from general to specific.
Go for it.
So why don't we start with the first 2 questions, which talk about the attributes of an elected library board versus the attributes of an appointed library board.
Sure. Fundamentally, the differences between an appointed board and an elected board are the differences between responsible to the taxpayers in that 1776 mode of American governance. The elected board allows for that direct representation for the taxpayers to a body that levies taxes. It is one of the gravest responsibilities that any elected official has, is to levy taxes. And it's not just about how do we choose to spend it, it's all the things that go into what structure of government do we want to put to work. And then accountability that comes from direct elections is a very American small R republic kind of approach. So fundamentally, it's whether or not the board has a fiduciary and not just accountability, but the power to tax. Now, of course, in Illinois, library districts are non-home rule units of government. They do not have certain powers that municipalities do. They're more akin to school districts. There's no police power, for example, where you would, of course, need even a higher level of accountability from the voters to the electeds. But fundamentally, for a board, it's that power to tax. It is the most impolite thing that you can do, short of talking about religion. So the opportunity then to look at an appointed board as a power to advise. And who are they advising? Of course, is the library director and the staff and the conduct day-to-day, but fundamentally the advisory role is to the municipal partner who has that power to tax. So neither is incorrect as a form of government, neither is it correct as an expression of the people's will, but the fundamental accountability of an elected official to the taxpayer is the difference.
Could you go into the pros and cons of that type of accountability?
Sure.
Because direct accountability is something that can be a double-edged sword in the sense that direct accountability can create instability over time, for example. And that may be good because citizens want the change and so it reflects the thing. But there's also sort of an institutional element beyond sort of what the citizens see as the fiduciary obligations of a trustee.
Well, in our system, we have terms for electeds. Federally, it's 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, depending on what your office is. And the frequency of elections provides, depending on the body, a level of accountability. You normally don't see 2-year cycles on elected officials at the library trustee level. It's usually a 4-year. Around the country, though, there's variations on it.
Are boards classified?
Pardon me?
Are boards classified? Are elective boards such that different members are up for election at different times, therefore creating continuity over time?
Depends on the state.
Okay.
There are certain states.
In Illinois?
In Illinois, there's standard elections, generally speaking, though sometimes you find situations where elections sync up based on retirements, resignations, people moving out of jurisdictions and such. Yeah. The fundamentals here, and I'm going to my notes on this because I have several different modes that I want to talk about that happen with a board regardless of whether it's an elected board or an appointed board.
Okay.
And these modes are much more significant, I think, over the long term than whether or not there's a date certain election that'll have a third and a third and a third of the board turnover, or if it's serving at the pleasure of an appointed council or for a term like that. The reason I want to bring this up is that those two modes of elected and appointed sort out fundamentally with a couple of different kinds of responsibilities based on either the political exigencies of the moment or the conversations that are happening in the community transparently. Regardless of whether or not it's an elected board or an advisory board, there are times where you have a board that is a governance board. They are there to put the whole thing to work as a structure. And they build out the frameworks, and they initiate those frameworks around taxes. And there's a pathway to levies, there's a pathway to issuing debt, there's a pathway to advise councils and elected officials. Another mode is a policy board. They're there to write and ensure that policies that are fair, compliant with both the federal law and state law and the constitutions of both of those are implemented and enacted. Their whole responsibility is about policy. And they might have to levy taxes, they might have to refer or approve ideas for taxation, but really what's their purpose? Another type of board's purpose could be advisory, even if it's elected, because sometimes a junior district in Illinois, in Louisiana, in Missouri, in Colorado, a junior district isn't setting the big agenda for the neighborhood. That's a council, it's a commission that's doing that. And that local board for that, even if it's elected for a library, is advising somebody else about literacy or about the community work that's being done by that library and not necessarily even exercising its full responsibilities. There's another mode for boards that could work for either elected or appointed, which is an interventionist board. Sometimes people are elected, they say, I'm gonna go and clean up house. I'm gonna go take care of this problem. And I'm here to intervene in the way things have been done, and appointed boards are appointed to intervene from time to time as well. The council says, we need to clean this up. We gotta get back on the right track, or get back on the track that we see it to be. That interventionist mode of behavior doesn't matter if it's elected or appointed. It's still it's the political and social terroir of the day. Likewise, there is the board, forgive me, I want to make sure I got it, planning boards. Planning boards are the last one. So sometimes a board has to be planning a new building. Sometimes we have to plan to change something very significantly in our structure. And that board is either elected or appointed to carry that heavy load. I mean, I'm not an architect, I'm not a space designer, I have no idea. If I was on that board, I'd have to learn a lot. But sometimes you bring in those folks or you elect those folks. So those visages of the board, those necessary activities of that board are agnostic about whether or not they're appointed or elected. It's more about the training that the board has. It's more about the support structures that they have in order to do those particular kinds of jobs. And I'm not here visiting Dennis Grove to tell you what type of board to have within those other categories, but to look at it and say, how are we supposed to be structured, elected or appointed? How are we supposed to be responsible? Is that governance, that interventionist, that planning, that advisory?
It sounds like those modes or categories could exist together. That is, that you could have several of them at one time. They're not mutually exclusive.
There are different balances to it, of
Sure.
course, yes.
But the important point is, if you need one in place at a specific time, it can exist and be in place regardless of whether you have an appointed structure or an elected selection process. That's what you're saying.
The incumbent board has a set of responsibilities for that moment in time, that term. Whether they're incumbents because they were appointed or incumbents because they're elected, assuming one of the most dangerous things for board members, present company accepted on this. And I was on the board in Berwyn, Illinois for 8 years. I was board president for 6 years. I was an appointed board member there. You're gonna be hearing in a week or two from Joe Philipek. He's on the board at Aurora. It's an elected position. You know, there's other, great, I love my service. I love doing my service. The long and the short of it was, we had a task to do during that incumbency. And when we were prepared to do it, we were able to do it in an open, transparent, consultative way for the benefit of the taxpayers and the people we were trying to serve. When we were not, we could have been appointed by, the new Chicago Pope could have appointed us, it wouldn't have made any difference. Because if we were not prepared properly, then we couldn't exercise that responsibility.
I kind of have a follow-up to that. I feel like we got here a lot because we wanted to make sure that our boards were accountable to our taxpayers. And I feel like we got here a little bit because of that kind of interventionist piece of, we really want to make sure that we are doing right. And so I'm just kind of trying to figure out, and there were some issues that had come up, in the community. We're seeing just kind of huge waves nationally of just turmoil, political turmoil. And so from your experience, do you see any differences in terms of elected versus appointed boards of having influence from those national political waves and turmoil? Is one more prone to issues than the other, or is one more perhaps protected from those issues than another, or do you see any differences in how they behave kind of over time?
That is a very interesting question, and after receiving some of the rumination points, some of the questions in advance, I went and looked at, so Everett Library Institute supports data collection on book bans, attempts to ban books, challenges to books, and affronts essentially the First Amendment around the country for the last several years. It's not self-reported data, it's collected by an investigator, her name is Tanslin Magnuson. She's essentially a private investigator for the First Amendment here. And the data set is extraordinarily large and extraordinarily deep. And I started to look to try and answer that question in public libraries. And so I started breaking open whether or not it was elected boards or appointed boards. And I rapidly realized that I could spend a tremendous amount of time trying to answer this question forensically, but then I just looked at all of the school board situations. There's a tremendous amount of censorship and book ban activity, campaigns to erase or suppress different populations and different people in K-12. I mean, there's as big of a fight in K-12 as there could possibly be over free expression and civil rights. And in the states where they're all elected, there's plenty of them going on. In the states where they're appointed by a county commission or a town board, there's plenty of them going on. And I can more categorically look at it like that. Massachusetts and Connecticut are having the same kind of problems that Mississippi and Wyoming are having. And it is, we are not immune to political pressure when we sit in these seats. And having sat in the same seats that you folks have, I have not sat in this seat, but that political pressure gets obviated by the understanding of what does the law actually say. And we around the country, we in Illinois, have a problem of both political literacy and legal literacy deficits in our electeds and our appointments. And not knowing what the law actually says about freedom of speech, or what the law actually says about civil rights, what the law says about public accommodation, what the law says about freedom of religion in the Establishment Clause. All those things that go into a limited public forum that is the public library, and a place of public accommodation that is the public library, without having an understanding of what the law actually says, people either want to do the right thing, but it's based on a hunch. It doesn't matter if you're elected or appointed. It's based on hearsay. They watch a lot of Law and Order, and they think that's how the world works. Seriously.
Oh, yeah.
Every single case starts with the client walking in, and later that day, they have a full jury trial.
Absolutely. Yes, yeah. So, there's a lot of conventional wisdom in library governance, and that is the singular problem.
So you feel like that training and education piece that you were talking about earlier
Yes.
really plays a huge role in this?
If somebody comes up to you and says, this book is a problem, if somebody comes up to you and says, this program offends me, let's have a conversation based on the laws of the state of Illinois, the Constitution of the United States. And then, as elected or appointed, in Illinois, there's a beautiful thing that happens when you sit down, and you've done this yourselves, you take an oath of office. And that oath is the most serious part of it, whether you have an appointed or elected, and the gravity of that oath goes back again to that 1776, 1787 kind of mode of America.
There are different statutes that govern certain elected versus appointed library boards, correct? But ultimately, their fiduciary obligations and the types of oversight that they have over the library director, and so is the same. They're roughly exercising the same responsibility in both cases. Is that right?
In Illinois, the paths diverge slightly because you do have the power to tax if you're in a district, and you have the responsibility to advise if you're in an appointed board setting. So those two responsibilities do diverge, but you still have a duty of care, and you still have a fiduciary, even if it's to spend in accountability and feeding back to the electeds.
Sure.
In other states, like Colorado, if you take a look at the way Colorado boards are structured, there are 6 different modes of appointment for library boards in Colorado, and they all come down to this funnel point where all their responsibilities are exactly the same. So we're actually participating in an early conversation in Colorado about why do we have 6 different modes of appointing folks. Why don't we just have one? Because when you hear it down to it, it's just one rail of activity that they do, one rail of responsibility.
And kind of piggybacking off of what Leslie asked you, when it comes to like a national crisis, let's say COVID, major funding cuts, is there a type of board that you think better would handle or handled those situations?
Sure. So during the Great Recession, the forecasting that during the COVID financial issues, we were forecasting 2 different sets of problems prior to the CARES Act and ARPA being issued by the federal government. One track was library districts with their own power to tax based on property tax. And the stability of the property tax, even the growth of the property tax market, meant that boards that had the power to tax or the power to re-index on an annualized or biennial basis should exercise those powers. They should go back up to the voters. So we were forecasting that they would weather it better financially than municipally attached libraries without dedicated levies because of the impact in COVID, the shutdowns around sales tax and around use tax and all that kind of good stuff, hotel tax. Now with ARPA and before the CARES Act, the smoothing out of that. But as you look at financial disruptions, municipally tied libraries they're inextricably linked to the health of their municipality. So while the library board itself doesn't have the direct power to tax, it does have a responsibility to forecast and help the elected officials understand what the tax rate should be. And we do see more stability in places like Illinois and Iowa and Missouri when there is a dedicated levy line in the local tax bill. So it's not that the council has abrogated its responsibility, it's designated a particular tax line, which allows for more transparency and visibility and some micromanagement as well. But in the end, if you can't set your own dials, which an elected board can do, then you are, of course, beholden to whatever the municipality's multiple contingencies are. If we're in Wyoming, the Wyoming County Commissions own the library, the schools, the city dump, and the airport. Like, there's a tremendous amount of responsibility. Some of them the county fair, like all of the things that go into a county. It's very hard to find that little spot of 4% of the revenues for libraries.
Just picking up on the last two questions, if I can. At the outset, when you introduced yourself and you explained the role of every library, so the activities you've been involved in, it struck me that in your experience in promoting these different campaigns for a variety of different libraries, I'm assuming that you've dealt with different forms of libraries, municipal, district, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Some have been elected, some have been appointed. Had, in your experience advocating on behalf of libraries for whatever, have you experienced any different challenges in supporting or advocating on behalf of an elected board versus an appointed board? Or has it just been all over the map?
It's all over that. The comfort, familiarity, and competency of the board, and the comfort, familiarity, and competency of the staff around the issues that they're being asked to face when it comes to being a tax, issuing a tax measure, putting out a bond. I mean, we've worked with libraries where they have to put out a bond to build a new building because the current building's falling apart. It's literally the nicest falling apart building alone, you know. Banister comes off when you walk by, you know? And if the library board and the staff have never done anything more than buy a house, you know, they've never considered about municipal debt service, they've never heard about debt servicing, you know, there's fear that kicks in. And that primary affect paralyzes boards, whether they're elected or appointed. It paralyzes commissions as well. That's why you bring in lawyers, that's why you bring in financial advisors, that's why you bring in architects and engineers. I mean, why are we doing carpeting in here instead of tile? I don't know, but somebody who knows what they're doing should tell me if I'm responsible for it. And I'm trying to dodge the question.
No.
It really is, there's the visage, or sorry, the elected versus appointed here is not, it's what's gonna happen in the next 5, 7, 10 years for this library, you know, for this community. What's the 20-year long-range plan for Downers Grove? And what kind of responsible domain do they have? If one of them lends itself more appropriately because you feel that you can get a better pool of people who want to run for or stand for election, or if you feel like we have a better pool because we can say, we need some experts, we need some thoughtfuls, we need some competence, you know, we need some empathetics on that board.
Yeah, I didn't perceive to be dodging the question because it was just purely delving into your experience. And the experience has been all over the map, and that's been your experience.
Yeah. There are fewer libraries that want to embrace their responsibilities to build a new building or to put out tax measures than there should be around the country. It takes tremendous courage to say we're going to talk about raising your taxes. And that is that's a big civic conversation. And that's really where the shortfalls are. Do we have the skill sets, the knowledge, and the experience, but also the courage?
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. All right.
Maybe.
No, these are questions that I think are important to us. Diversity of composition and representation, what you just led into. The word representation can mean the will of the public, and I'm going to read this because I'll make sure that I say everything. The public selects board members to represent their interests, but it can also mean the board is representative of a diverse community, including those who do not vote and those who do not have economic means or temperament to run for office. Are elected or appointed library boards more representative in this broader sense?
It's a very good question. So elected officials, generally speaking, are motivated by either people, place, or platform to run for office. People is not voters, people is my people, okay? And My People is driven sometimes by demographics, sometimes it's driven by origin, sometimes it's driven by community's intention and development over time. Place, in a small jurisdiction like Downers Grove, or in my hometown of Berwyn, Illinois, we still have a lot of places. We got north, we got north of 22nd Street and south of 22nd Street, you know? I know, that's what I'm saying, yeah. So place, is a driver. And then platform. Platform is when somebody says, I'm gonna run to fix or to do or to clean up or to enact. So the self-identified person who wants to run for office as a representative of either people, place, or platform is going to come from a lot of different people, a lot of different places, and a lot of different platform perspectives, provided that there's a path to enfranchisement and access to being on the ballot, Can't control for that otherwise. Appointed boards are not necessarily so for elected boards, I don't believe that there is a mechanism available in Illinois or in 49 other states to have a diversity quotient on election day, unfortunately, or fortunately, depends on how you want to look at how governance is done. The best simulacrum of that is wards or ridings or places, dividing up geographically, with the hope that the census tracts and those wards somehow or another reflect diversity in the process. And you see how apportionment and districts are built for congressional seats. Or if it's gerrymandering and we don't like it, it's fair representation when we do. On an appointed board, there is not a mechanism in Illinois for municipalities to consider characteristics other than qualifications on an appointed board. If we were in Connecticut or in even Washington State or Oregon, where there are a lot of 501c3 nonprofit boards, you could theoretically have a conversation about the state's corporate board rules making around diversity and representation. But that would even be a stretch because even those C3 boards have been considered by the state as being a public library, and therefore that freedom of speech issue about service and the no fear, no favor issues in 5th and 14th, I don't know how you do it, other than we have conversations in an appointed board setting where people from many different backgrounds, different stages of life, different needs, are supported to be able to raise their hand and say, I would like to be considered for service. And then the elected officials who do that appointment hear from their constituents, their people, their places, to say we would like to see us in a new way or a different way on that. And the same thing goes for electoral politics. Somebody says, I'm going to make a run at it. Otherwise, I don't know the mechanisms in public bodies to do that appropriately, under law.
So you just talked about how things work under law, but can you make any observations about how things work in practice? For example, there's some sort of selection bias associated with choosing to run for an election, right? You identify people, place, and platform. Conversely, appointment, you have a village council. The village council understands the composition of the existing board. They understand if there's an opening, that they're trying to fill some sort of gaps in qualifications. That's within their statutory obligations there. But that different process may lead to a different type of representation, and I don't even necessarily mean, sort of intrinsic qualities. It could be other qualities such as at a specific time you want someone with a specific set of experience. Have you made any observations across all of the different sort of boards that you have observed that elections versus appointments make a difference in that sense?
I have been considering that since reading the question deck in preparation here. And if we're going through, in my professional Rolodex, my professional dossier, about places that have had trouble. And places that have had no drama. And the thing that is missing from libraries where there's trouble is either a adherence to the oath of office or an application of the oath of office with an ethical framework within like a set of bylaws. Places where there's no trouble either have no trouble because nothing's going on, and there's 9,850 library districts around, so you take a distribution curve, and a bunch of them have nothing going on, it's fine, you know? There's just no drama because there's no drama. But in places where they have taken a deliberative step to say, how are we going to apply our oath of office and the laws of the land, not only to our patron services, but how do we do EEOC for our staff, and how do we treat each other not as parliamentary foils. Because again, you can have a parliamentary system or parliamentary procedures for an appointed board, you have to have rules, Robert's rules. An elected board, you have your Roberts, you know, there's Sturgis, whatever. How do we apply that in terms of an ethical framework? So that ethical code, that ethical pledge that doesn't supersede or supplant the oath of office, but extends it to application, is something that does inoculate against problems, and it does allow for healing, I think, after problems have been had.
So you're saying if you have a code of conduct or some sort of ethical framework that's within the bylaws governing the trustees, that mitigates the likelihood that there's going to be trouble,
Yeah,
even in situations where they're appointed.
because what that does is it allows for, who's calling balls and strikes in a board meeting? The board president is there to moderate a meeting, but not to call, you're out of order, that's based on the rules. We hold each other accountable, both to the law, but to the conduct of the board. And that conduct is not governed exclusively by the law, it's governed by those bylaws. And
Could it also be governed by the council's framework for removal?
So that's a very interesting thing, because
I mean, it's obviously at the pleasure of the council, but the council can set their own parameters for that, correct?
in Illinois, it's the pleasure of the council, but there's a certain administrative holdback for mayors as well.
Okay.
In terms of almost vetoing the dismissal, it's not appellate in the way that judiciary is, it's very much administrative. Yes, there is always the accountability in an appointed position in Illinois. Funnily enough, there is no impeachment of elected library board members in Illinois, and you go to a place that's had trouble, and there's folks in the audience who are like, why can't we impeach Mr. or Mrs. Smith, you know? That mechanism doesn't exist under Illinois law. But the board's accountability to its oath of office and to itself as a deliberative body that's trying
And
to
to
set
each
policy,
other.
and to each other,
Yeah.
yeah, the corporate nature of it.
Can we continue on diversity just for a second?
Of course.
Is there one form that tends to have a more diverse board, an elected board versus an appointed board? When we speak just like intrinsic diversity.
So, you know, I don't mean to speak ill of New Jersey, but if you look at a place like Newark or Bayonne or Jersey City, where the community is historically, back in the day, it was French and Italian in Bayonne, and now it's French, Italian, Haitian, Somali, all kind of Mexico, you know, it took them just as long to get there. It took them just as long to get those different communities where somebody had both the personal ability to say, I want to run, and the community support, and the latitude. I mean, we're here on a Thursday night, you know, for fun right now. Like, this takes a tremendous amount of personal ability to put your hand up and say, I will, if asked. And then you go over to a town like, I don't want to talk out of the school again, but you go to Northvale, New Jersey, which is right on the New York border, right across the Tappan Zee there. And they've got a really big Korean community, but I haven't seen a single one of them on the board. Because it's the white folks who get together and they're all like, we're all here together, we're doing a great job being governing, on this board. It's a cultivation of candidate that's necessary, but that's supra, I would suggest, to the responsibilities of the board. One of the beautiful things that the library does is that civic and small d democratic training, support, and guidance. One of the areas that I've seen is successful for boards to find new candidates, again, whether it's elected or appointed, is to have some mechanism for participation in the formal governance structure that is of citizens. It's more than just doing a survey, it's more than just stopping people at the jewel to find out how they feel or think. There are occasions in planning, in budgeting, in forecasting and strategic planning where you can open up seats, But we don't advise on having like a student member or something. We have to be structured within Illinois law, and those aren't provided for except in ad hoc kind of committee situations. But to encourage that, also to set responsibilities about who actually has responsibility to vote when it's time to vote. Because if you have a giant room and a lot of people have been participating, and it moves to like, okay, are we gonna tax and spend right now, or are we gonna set policy? Then we also have to make sure that those guardrails are there. But to give people experiential learning, to be able to self-identify and say, I can do this, my goodness, those pathways, I think, again, are part of the bylaws and practices. Yeah, the law is not very concerned, unfortunately, in Illinois, or in 49 other states, with making sure that that folks who are in and of the community are represented on those boards that serve the community's trust. That's
Follow-up questions to that. One point of clarification before New Jersey, does it require elected?
So New Jersey has appointed boards, to the exception of a handful of them that have electeds.
But you were referencing specific cities.
Yeah, those three are all appointed, in fact.
Oh.
Yeah.
The second question was, where you have elections, is it your experience that there are turnout issues, that there's sort of low turnout? Our experience with the village council until the most recent election, where record turnout, is that it's a small segment of the overall population that may be using the library that ends up turning out for the election. And so if you extrapolate that from council members to library trustees, you could say that the activists are then sort of the polar parts of our community, may be deciding who is governing the library. Is that theory something that you've actually observed in elections, or does it tend to lead to a fairly broad spectrum of the public taking interest in?
There are folks who are doing doctoral level dissertations on this topic that I think you should probably be consulting more than me on this one.
Okay.
Only because in the micro, any particular election that we work on is for ballot measures, not for candidates. And our work is to forecast based on that particular upcoming election. And we know from the political sciences that there's significant differences in terms of turnout between types of elections, timing of elections, and what else is on the ballot. We also know for library bond elections and referenda and levies and such, that they're at the bottom of the ballot. And there's this whole thing about fatigue on the ballot that we could get into, but I don't think it's germane to this conversation today.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just one more question. So, I don't know where this concept got invented, but we came up with, at some point, collectively came up with a concept called the hybrid approach to governance. my understanding of it, although I've never received a definition, but we'll make one up,
Okay.
is that it involves a subset of trustees being elected and appointed.
Mhm.
Now, staff researched this concept and couldn't find
Right.
anything.
Yeah.
Donald Rumsfeld famously said, "The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence."
Mhm.
So it's possible that it exists and that we just haven't found that needle in the haystack.
Mhm.
That was on weapons and not mass destruction. So
So,
I guess I'm asking, in your experience, understanding library trends,
Yeah.
are you aware of any jurisdiction that has a hybrid approach? And if so, what was their experience with that?
I don't, and I've been professionally intrigued by that, to the point of cracking open our 50-state library law survey that we did back in 2016. It's published on our open access journal, of Local Librarian, if you want to check it out. That doesn't exist.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the best of my knowledge. The closest analog to it is when, and Illinois got this, back in the old days, is when there's an elected board, but the charter, bylaws, and statutory obligations of that board requires them to incorporate a member of a council that is either coterminous or adjacent or, somehow or other, so that this one member of the council or a designee of the mayor, for example, or the mayor, has to be on that board. They're not elected in the same election frameworks, but that's it. That's the only time it ever is. So you'll have a 6-member board that's elected, and then a designee from their municipal contract partner or something like that. And so in California, you have frameworks where there are elected officials who are not elected to be on the board, but they're part of a joint powers authority. That is peculiar to California. Like there's some nuances to this, but under current law, you would have to pass something like a Pegasus unicorn law in Illinois to get that to happen here.
Downers Grove thinks it's special, so that unique situation could occur
Absolutely.
with the right legislature.
Absolutely. What unites us is unhappy, what divides us is that.
If I can pick up on that point, just because we here, the broader we community, have been talking for some time about different structural arrangements whereby a library board of trustees can be appointed or elected. And there's a handful. One of the questions that I asked, I'll take credit for or blame for, as the case may be, is somewhat open-ended by design, which is, are we missing something? Is there some other form or some other structural way in which, other than a municipal library or a district, is there some other way that we're not aware of that a library board of trustees can go from appointed to be elected, or vice versa for that matter?
So
Is there something we're missing?
I'm sorry, when you say go from, you mean what's the enacting ordinance or?
Well, and I understand that there obviously there are statutes and there are regulations and things like that, but what we have been dealing with is a relatively limited number of paths.
Mhm.
Basically, you can be municipal, you can be district, or we'll hear more in a couple weeks about the Aurora model.
Right, the Pegasus unicorn model, yes.
Yes, although don't conflate the mythology. But point well taken. But is there something that we're just not aware of?
Not in Illinois.
Okay.
There's other models in other states. They're all academically interesting, but they're unavailable to statutory.
Well, right, they're not statutorily available then.
Yeah.
They only exist in men.
That's right. I would caution, not just Downers Grove, I'd caution Effingham. I'd caution, Lincoln, Illinois, against trying to run something special without being more consultative with the rest of the Illinois library community. Because if there is something to learn, it wouldn't just apply to Downers Grove.
Sure.
It would potentially be applying more broadly. And we have a problem in Illinois, which is that about 1.5 million Illinoisans do not have library services, because we haven't figured it out between the 1876 version and the 1972 version, the 1986 version as amended, and why aren't we providing direct library services for those folks? So if there is an exploration that's meta and bigger, the rest of the Illinois library community should get dragged into it, you know? But within the form of Illinois law that allows you to function as a community that wants to have high quality library services, again, I would look at it from the perspective of what's the next 5, 7, 10 years? Are we an interventionist board? Are we a planning board? Are we gonna be doing some big heavy lifting? Do we have to rework the system? You know, those kinds of roles, because the political capital it's gonna take to make a structural change, is it worth your investment, quite frankly? We run library elections all around the country, and there have been places where it is much easier to have a good conversation with a city council or county government about debt servicing of a municipal project that's gonna be around for the next 50 years than it is to go out to all the voters in the community to get them to understand, from a financial literacy perspective, what debt means in a municipal context. I'm not saying that you shouldn't go out for a plebiscite, you know, or a petition, or those kinds of things. But the political capital, where it should be applied, you know, right now, that's a leadership decision. It's not just a statutory allowable.
Thank you.
Sorry.
We didn't really talk about this because I know that Downers Grove, I'm not speaking of our budget now, but what are like some of the financial implications to our taxpayers, whether it's appointed, elected? And I know that you don't know our specifics, but just in general.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, Illinois, Illinois specific, thank you.
So, an independent library district has to assume all of the responsibilities for the library. It owns the building, it owns the collection, it owns the insurance to safeguard both the building and the collection. It pays the staff, it does all the IMRF obligations. It's got slip and fall, you know, insurance for, you know, it's got everything. It's got electrical, HVAC, internet, are you doing E-rate or not here? I don't know. You know, like all those things that are owning as the trustees, the sworn officers owning that. Therefore, you have to have a tax base that is sufficient to support it. And that $0 balanced budget that's required for that non-home rule unit of government means that you have to be able to tax enough to spend enough to serve the public for however many hours, the kind of collection, the staffing that you want. Right now, I don't know what percentage of that is absorbed by the village and not done by the library. I do know that in Berwyn, we have a connection there, and that library every so often says, why don't we go district? You know, and the most recent time was when McNeil Hospital, those of you who know McNeil Hospital became part of Loyola and stopped being a taxable parcel, became part of a nonprofit, and the city of Berwyn lost about $3 million in property taxes. So they said, okay, how do we offload everything in the meantime? So we went back, and I was brought in as a technical advisor. Having been on the board, it's nice, but also being able to bring this in, brought in some help with financial planning. We modeled it out, and the financial planner said, if you don't increase your tax level prior to emancipating the library by, it's basically, you gotta bump up the tax rate by about $2.6 million on a $3.9 million levy in order to get there. To be able to afford the insurance and the HVAC and to pay the staff and do IT and all that stuff as an independent, whether you're contracting with the city of Berwyn or you're contracting with Al's House of IT Services, doesn't matter, somebody's gotta do it, you know? You're gonna hire some guy named Al to do it, you know? All of that responsibility in Oregon, I brought up Oregon earlier because there's certain like the further west you get, the more they figured it out, I think sometimes. And Oregon requires any unit of government that wants to come into existence to do what's called a statement of economic feasibility. Can we forecast 30 years worth of the tax base in this jurisdiction, in this map, and know that we can afford to do it, not on day one, but on day however many thousand that is. And without having the feasible tax base for it, you have situations like in New Lenox, where they built a wonderful building, and they didn't pass the ordinance, or they didn't pass the levy, the referendum to operate it. We're house poor for like the last 18 years. We finally got it over the threshold a few months ago, really, about 18 months ago. That kind of financial forecasting, appointed or elected, doesn't matter. It's like, can this tax base support this entity that will be here for our grandchildren?
So kind of continuing on that, in terms of kind of the pattern of libraries either changing from appointed to elected or elected to appointed in Illinois, what are the reasons that you've seen in those shifts? I know there had been some changes to the Illinois Library Act, there had been changes to, types of municipal governments. Are there any patterns that you've seen? I know this wasn't on here, so if you can't say that off the top of your head, I understand.
So,
but it just made me think of that.
Yeah, my very quick Rolodex spin of what was the last library in Illinois that helped take district? I think it was suburban Springfield, and I cannot remember the name of the town. I felt very disrespectful. They did it because they needed to build a building, and they wanted to in one fell swoop take care of it. But they've been moving from essentially like a little farm town, and as suburban Springfield, they were growing, very quickly. It's a little bit like Aurora 25 years ago, where, so it was time to do it in terms of their population size and their evolution as a community. Other states that have this opportunity, it's usually done in response to growth. So that's a factor that I think is important, but also to consider 5, 7, 10, 15 years from now, where's downward growth going to be? I mean, Berman's pretty landlocked. I don't know how you guys are doing, The one interesting factoid in Illinois is that Cicero went district several years ago, and I have to go back and look at the dates, but they spent several years as an independent library district. And there's two stories. One is that it was difficult to find folks to govern and to run. And the other was that it was more expensive than they thought because they didn't do all the proper financial modeling. And they voted to go back to the town of Cicero. They went back to it being an advisory board. And that was like an interesting American curiosity to me until this conversation came up. So.
We're glad we can provide you with curiosity.
Absolutely.
On this formal government structural question, we, and broader we, have been unable to locate another Illinois municipality that operates under a council manager form of government that has an appointed library board. Are you aware of it?
I'm not, and whoever put the dossier together, as I said before, did a hell of a job.
Well, great step. I have one last question. You're not supposed to ask open-ended questions, I'm going to.
Certainly.
First of all, thank you again very much for your time, for being here. It's great. We really appreciate it. This has been fascinating and very illuminating. You obviously have done your homework before coming here, So I feel like it's fair to ask you this question.
Sure.
Knowing what our mission is, and knowing what our purpose is and what we're trying to accomplish on behalf of the community, which is largely educational, what else should we be asking? I mean, I know our charter is our charter, but what else should we be asking that we haven't asked? And if you don't have an answer now, we know where to find you.
No, this is a very good question. The question that I would ask is, what problem are you trying to solve? You know, the fundamentals on this. I'm sorry?
As I've been asking that too.
Okay, yeah, I mean,
That question's been asked.
yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to.
No, that was my question from the beginning, what is the problem trying to solve?
Yeah, and that's a very fundamental question to ask. If it is one of the quality of candidate, there's mechanisms civically to start cultivating people who can put their hand up and say, I want to run, you know? If it's the capabilities of the incumbents, you know, then there's trainings to offer. If it is a situation where there is a fundamental form issue that does not allow you to function unless you change that form, then it's worth the political capital and the civic time that it takes. But otherwise, if you back it up enough, can we support a better civic dialogue or a better set of financial or legal or facility or political literacies amongst the leadership of the community? This ad-hoc-committee surfaced a tremendous amount of information about libraries. You are all not qualified to get your MLS, you know? Really, seriously, you could probably teach a Dominican right now, you know? And
That's not nice to say about Dominican.
no, it's at the high school over there. It's at the MLS program. What I'm saying is that this community has already surfaced those big conversations. And many communities in the United States of America have never even, like, we got a library, the lights are on, people drive by, they think everything's fine, you know? And you've already started to do this kind of good work. Now, again, is there a problem that needs solving that has to do with the form, the governance form? Otherwise, let's back it up and see where the holes are.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Sure. No, you've been very gracious to me. Thank you for your time tonight.
No, thank you very
No,
much.
thank you.
And as courtesy, is there anything that you would like to ask of us or anything you would like to say? Really appreciate your sharing all of your experience and knowledge with us.
I would like to suggest that you're doing the right kind of work right now. What comes out at the end of this is, I think, people in this town love the library enough to show up as electeds and appointeds, but people in this town love the library enough to show up on a random Thursday night. You all have beautiful political capital to work here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We reserve the right to follow up with any questions.
Absolutely.
So we appreciate your time here, but officially we'll bring this part of the meeting to a close. And thank you very much. Appreciate it. And obviously, if there are other things we can do later, we can always email them again, or ask them next time.
I will be at your disposal, yes. I'll be at your disposal.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Be careful what you, no, we do appreciate your time, and thank you very much. It's been very, very helpful. Okay. Yes, absolutely.
One other element is if the public has any questions for us that we would want to sort of consult him
I
on.
was just going to say that, so thank you very much. Because we're going to move to item 5, which is public comment, but we're not taking public comment directed towards our guest. If there are questions that you would like to suggest that we ask either our guest tonight or future guests, by all means communicate those to us and we will follow up accordingly. But to spare you the Spanish Inquisition that we try to avoid at the very beginning. But so now we'll turn to the point of the evening, which is for those members of the public, and yes, thank you very much for being here. It is a good reflection upon our community. Any questions or comments you have, again, limited to the narrow scope of our term.
Thanks very much for this, very helpful. I think the last thing I heard him say was that people in this town love the library and that you would have the political capital. And I think we learned that, I think the election showed that, the library, I think, really, galvanized voters. And so then I would ask, how do we want to extend that political capital? And is making this kind of switch the energy that we want to put into it and the fight that it could engender. And I'm not sure it is. Again, I'm not sure what's broken because of what we've learned about how people love the library. So I think the exercise in digging it out and digging it up and making sure that the cards are all out there and the information is there to look at has been great. But I'm hoping that we decide that we're doing great and we're just gonna keep that up. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Question, is the microphone in a place where it will be?
Yeah, they're all.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Good evening, welcome.
Hi, Laura Cannadosky. I heard some things in there, I hope correctly, that that there's no impeachment of library trustees as elected library trustees within Illinois law. And that, I think, would be a problem, just from my perspective, knowing what we went through twice. So I would think that's in favor of keeping the appointed board process. But since the community from both sides of this issue, I think rightly wants more transparency in appointed processes, then that stuff you said about bylaws and conduct, code of conduct in the bylaws, and I guess that would be village councilmen because they really have power, I think. But maybe also the library trustees code of conduct or bylaws would be great, because I think that's what everyone's looking for more transparency or rules in that appointment process, and or just code of conduct within the library trustee board. So that's kind of what I took away, and that those problems with the tax levy having to rise probably is probably really the case as well from, again, this short, interaction and the expertise we saw tonight, so thank you. That really that tax base might have to go up, so I guess that's it, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening, welcome.
Thank you. First, I'd like to, on behalf of the audience here and generally the public, thank our guest, your guest, for giving us all the education and the time, because it was helpful to us too. One thing about the conversation, if I missed it, it doesn't, so far, have not heard what specifically changes would be or mean to Downers Grove residents, the services the village provides to the library, the economic impact of taking those services away, if shifted into an elected board, and the kind of microeconomics of the conversation. I'm with Laura and others here who hope we never get to that level, because I don't think it's an advantageous discussion, and hopefully we'll never will not ask the question about whether we need to shift to an elected board. But the information that started some of this about how specifically it would impact Downers Grove residents, their tax bills, their services, if we shifted to an elected format, I don't think has been addressed in any kind of clarity. And if you all have more information than I do, then apologies, but I'm still as in the dark on that particular aspect of this as I was before.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the audience? Good evening, welcome.
Hi, good evening. Trying to formulate this because I was listening in real time and didn't have a chance to prepare, but The discussion seemed to be based around two models. One was elected, having taxing decision authority, versus appointed, not having that, having advisory. And that was confusing to me because the current library board we've got is appointed, but sets its own levy. So it seems like that's part of the issue being debated right now, is it's appointed and yet the library board determines what the tax levy is going to be. So I didn't understand how that fit in. It seemed like it didn't really get addressed, but that just may have been, I didn't follow it. So that might be something to follow up with. The other thing along those lines, certainly at the beginning, the talk was about, I think the question was asked about the differences in terms of governance and how it's reflecting the will of the people in the community. And it seemed like the discussion was all around the tax issue and saying an elected board decides the taxes, and because they're elected, they're directly representing it, and the appointed board does not. But to me, it seems like there's a larger question beyond that. The same sort of topic comes up in terms of discussing what's the issue of a business. Because there's one school of thought that says a business exists to make money, and whether you sell hot dogs or make nuclear reactors, that's secondary. You just try to make money. Those tend to not be successful. The other school of thought is, or the way of looking at this, is that a business exists to serve its mission of serving certain set of customers and fulfilling their needs, and that the money follows if you do that well. And that seems to be where the successful companies follow and serve the ones that grow into be very large ones. So I think along those same lines here in terms of this question for the library, does the library exist to make optimal use of the tax revenue and the other things are secondary, or does the library exist to serve the needs of the community in providing the types of library services that we use and are very widely appreciated here? And then the tax is the means of fulfilling that kind of a mission. I tend to favor that sort of view because I think the needs of the community should come first, and the taxes is basically how we make those kinds of things operate. And I felt like that didn't really get covered in the discussion tonight, so maybe that would be in the future. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Other questions or comments? No? Don't all do it.
I was gonna suggest before Kylie speaks, that maybe we just clarify that one point that I'm sure you guys actually know, is your role in our sort of setting our tax levy. You approve the budget.
You approve the levy.
Yeah.
We don't approve the levy.
And then second
Well,
point,
we approve what I'm saying, our budget.
second.
The levy is included in ours.
So second point is there a dedicated levy line?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
we have a dedicated.
So one of the points that John was making is that creates more transparency and accountability. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you very much. It's very helpful. I have two questions or points. One is, will the village be providing financial information about how much resources the library uses, like the cost value, like the electricity, payroll, all those services that the village provides for the library? Going back to 1995, when there was an attempt for an elected library board, it was estimated that the electricity was $80,000 a year that the village provided for the library for free. Now, that's 30 years ago. So obviously with the fact that the building is now a lot bigger because of the renovations and the additions that have gone on since 1997, costs have probably will have increased. So will the village be able to provide information to us as to what those costs would be for the library if they went to an elected library board only? And then the other thing that really stood out for me tonight was, what problem are we trying to solve? And I think that comes back to why we're all here and how this ad hoc committee is here. I still believe that the problem is a village council problem, it's an appointment process problem. And I do not believe that investing all of our political capital, all our financial capital in trying to fix something that's not broken is not in the best interest of our community, especially when the most obvious starting point would be to fix the appointment processes. That's all, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from members of the audience? Thank you for your comments, thank you for being here, thank you for taking all this in. I hope you'll come back for part 2 on June 5th. But before we go to that, any questions or comments from members of the ad hoc committee? Just a couple for me. One, I'm just going to repeat something I said. I think when we first started this ad hoc is, at least my thinking has evolved over time, and I think I actually intended to answer the question on what's the problem we're trying to fix. Some people may be trying to fix a problem, but my thinking has evolved to where it's not a problem to be fixed, but a question to be answered. There has been a question about, is there an advantage to being elected versus appointed? And I don't think, I know not everyone necessarily agrees with this, I don't think that necessarily means that there's a problem with the current or past library board of trustees. And a couple of examples I think I gave a few months ago was when the village looked at expanding the village council back in the day, and when the community looked at imposing term limits. Both of those were questions that were asked that there were both pros and cons to, but I don't recall either one involving any accusation that the current council was ineffective or the village was being run poorly. It was, should we have this or shouldn't we have this? And the community had a conversation about it on both of those. And in both cases, ultimately the answer was yes, but that doesn't mean anything. That was just a question that was answered. So just from my own personal perspective, I don't see it as a problem to be fixed. I see it as a community question to be answered, and we've done that before. So we're having a conversation, and it may or may not be a question the community answers. But I think it's important, at least from my perspective, to say that I don't view it as there's a problem with the library to be fixed. But I have come to view this as a question that people ask, well, why are we elected? Why are we appointed? Is there one better than the other? And very good information on the pros and cons of both. And the other thing I just want to add is we have gathered and can probably gather some more information about what the Downers Grove's specific cost would be of moving to a district, and I want to say district, not elected, because I'm not convinced that's the only way to go to elected. But if going to a district, certainly there are a lot of things that have been talked about, and I don't think it would be fair to ask our guests to ask a very specific Downers Grove question on that. I think that's our responsibility to get that information, because only we have that level of detail. We probably could talk more generally about challenges when our guest has supported communities going to a district and what that involved. But I think the question is fair, what does it mean for us? We can talk about New Jersey, but ultimately we really want to know what it means for us. And then I think that while we have some information in our packet tonight about kilowatts of electricity, I think the question was fairly asked about price. And that could be something too, although for my colleagues, that then begs the question of are there other ways to address that, such as intergovernmental agreements and things like that. So it gets very complicated because sometimes you can get to the same place in a different way, but it's a fair question. So we'll take that into account. So I just wanted to add those few thoughts, but I didn't have anything else other than our next meeting, which is June 5th. Did I have that right? Okay, otherwise I'll be the only one here. June 5th, same time, same place. And then we will have our next speaker, which has already been mentioned, which will be Joe Flippick.
So that's next Thursday, right?
Did I say 2 weeks? That's next week.
Next week, yes.
Time flies.
Don't do it in 2 weeks, because I won't be here.
Yes. No, we won't do it. It's June 5th. Very good. Anything else from members of the ad?
No, I just thank you for setting up this process. I thought today's session went well, meeting, I guess it is.
Thank you.
How do we like the layout?
It's odd for a little bit, because it wasn't like a full I felt like they were way over there, that's okay.
I like making eye contact with our
Yes.
experts, so
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
It's much better than that there.
That was the big, alright, very good. Motion adjourned,
Make a motion to
all in favor? Any opposed? The ayes have it, we are adjourned, thank you very much, good night.